Steelers week part 2 coming up on week, it always feels weird to say week 18, with the Bengals going to Pittsburgh and trying to get that oh so elusive win against the Pittsburgh Steelers and get a little help along the way to sneak into the postseason. I'm Anthony Cosenza. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the BLEAV podcast network. And joining me once again, we love having him on, also a member of the BLEAV network. Mark, I'm serious. We love having you on, Mark. Mark Bergin of the BLEAV in Steelers podcast, great friend of the show. We've been doing this for a handful of years now, Mark, and always appreciate your time and for you coming on. How you doing, man?
Anthony, I'm doing well, and I got to up my game in 2025. I got to get on your intro video. So whatever I've got to do to up my street cred to get on the opening credits of your show, that's the goal for me headed into this year. But let's do it. Week 18, Steelers Bengals. Let's do this.
We had you on I think it was both you and your co-host. We had you guys on one of our older intros a while back, and yes, you will be on the montage, my friend. We will get you on the montage, and we appreciate the time as always. Let's just kind of kick it off a little bit. I mean, I don't want to say I kind of predicted I don't want to say a bad season, but I guess a bad season by Steelers standards. I would say maybe more of a mediocre season from the Steelers based on the quarterback situation and just a perceived lack of roster depth, I guess. And here they are again, double-digit wins, getting into the playoffs, doing their thing. I mean, how surprised are folks on the Steelers side of the fence that the team is where they are, or was this just kind of the expectation playoffs? That's just, that's the entry point. Now we got to go beyond it. I don't know. I think some others are surprised a little bit at the Steelers and where they're at right now.
Yeah, with Pittsburgh, I'll let you in on a little secret. Hammer the over when the odds come out each year. For whatever reason, Vegas hates Pittsburgh when it comes to over-under win totals, and the Steelers always hit the over. I know Mike Tomlin in year 18, no losing seasons, 21 consecutive no losing seasons for the Steelers overall.
Crazy.
So you've been at least 500 or better. But going into this one, having lost 3 straight to Philly, Baltimore, Kansas City, not trending in the right direction going into this one if you're Pittsburgh. So that's where it's at stake. We talked on my pod, and I saved a thought for you, Anthony, on this, and I want to get your thoughts about this. The Bengals have won 4 in a row going into this game. The Steelers have lost 3 in a row. The way the Bengals are playing right now, having won 4 straight games, reminds me a little bit of that 2022 Detroit Lions team that actually missed out on the playoffs. And that Lions team, it was the year before the year. They finished the season. I'm doing live math here on the pod. They won 5 of their last 6 games, and it was like no one wanted to play them on the back half of the season. I said this on my show, and I don't know if this will upset my listeners and viewers. Your viewers and listeners will love this. If the Bengals beat the Steelers and get into the playoffs, they need some help to do that. I actually like Cincinnati's chances against the Buffalo Bills in a playoff matchup. So those are kind of some of my thoughts going into this game, and we can go from there. But for Pittsburgh, same old, same old. We're right where we expect to be going into this one in week 18.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that because, granted, the Bengals did not have some success against some of the teams and the quarterbacks that are currently in the AFC playoff picture, namely getting swept by the Ravens, both one-possession games, and losing to the Steelers once going into this one, and then of course losing to the Chiefs in that ridiculous, fourth down defensive pass interference deal at the end of that one in week 2. But like you mentioned, Burrow and the Bengals, this iteration of the Bengals has had a lot of success in the past against the Bills, the Chiefs, to a lesser extent, the Ravens, and really, quite honestly, it has and continues to be the Steelers that is the thorn in the side of the Bengals. I guess, we'll talk about some different things in just a minute here, but I mean, what is from the Steelers side of things? What is the view of, I guess, the Bengals in general, Joe Burrow in general, and or this team, this 2024 team that's been so up and down on a hot streak to end the year? We'll see where that ends up landing them. But I mean, are they still kind of the little brother that they love to, give the noogies to and all that kind of stuff? What's the viewpoint here now that the Bengals have, things that are different under Joe Burrow to a certain extent?
Let's go both sides of the football. Offensively, Burrow, Chase, Higgins, good luck. And there was a reason why when these two teams played, Joey Porter Jr. had as many penalties as he had in the game, but it was like Tomlin was quoted the following week as saying something along the lines of like, when you play Shaquille O'Neal, you got to use your fouls. I understand it. I understand it. Trying to stop this duo. So offensively, it's like you're going to have your hands full trying to stop the Bengals offense. Defensively, you guys got a guy off the edge, but other than that, it was like the last 2 times these two teams played, it was a get-right game for the Steelers offense. So how that shakes out, it's like, well, what side of the ball do you want to talk about? That's my thought process going on. I'll save the noogies for another time, maybe if these two teams meet in the playoffs.
Well, who's been, because again, we're talking about them being a little bit surprising this year. I mean, who's been kind of some pleasant surprises for the Steelers this year? I mean, if it's just one player or a couple, depending on what side of the ball we're talking about. I mean, who are some kind of like, hey, wow, we didn't really expect this production from this player this year, or, they stepped into a bigger role, and this has kind of helped get the Steelers where they are right now.
All right, I'll go offensively, and it's got to be George Pickens in year 3. And I know he missed 3 games during this stretch, but really when Russell Wilson came onto the field and took over as the starter for Justin Fields, there were a lot of people, myself included, that saying, Mike Tomlin, what are you doing? And he unlocked George Pickens. The production with Wilson and Pickens compared to Justin Fields and Pickens, it's the eye tests. You see it in the statistical production. I'm of the thought process, we've got some stud receivers in this game. We got Pickens, Chase, and Higgins. You talk about the money that those 3 guys are going to make, whether it's this coming off season or for Pickens. I suppose the Steelers could then wait an additional offseason. If I'm Pittsburgh going into Pickens' final year of his rookie deal, I get out ahead of the market saying, you're not even going to see the free agent market. We're going to make sure that we have you locked up because of the premium that you have to pay at the receiver position in this league. And if the Bengals are smart, it's something that they will also do this offseason with both Chase and Higgins. Those 2 contracts, because they're unresolved, are really looming over this game. And then as you head into the offseason, if you're the Bengals, you want to keep Joe Burrow happy too. So lock up both of those guys, because I'm telling you this as your opponent, they're really tough to game plan against. I don't care what the outcomes are between Steelers and Bengals specifically, but overall, you have as a good of a tandem, a good a receiving tandem as you have league-wide. So to answer your question, I'm going to go Pickens, because with this offense, in terms of the skill position players and what this offense does, when he's on the field versus when he's not on the field and the attention that he garners, it's with the Steelers offense, there's George Pickens and there's everyone else as far as I'm concerned. And that's where I'm at. Surprises, I'll give you one other one too. The offensive line has had a ton of injuries. You got Zach Frazier, who's a rookie at the center position, Mason McCormick at the right guard position, filling in for an injured James Daniels. They're getting very valuable reps, and they've played well moving bodies at the line of scrimmage. We're talking about, some call them the big uglies. I call them the big sexies up front. That has been a pleasant surprise because McCormick wasn't even expected to play. Really, Frazier wasn't either. He wasn't a starter going into this year, but injuries have forced you to adapt up front for Pittsburgh. But really, for me, it's Pickens. It's Pickens, and there's times where he does things that make you scratch your head and you say, why are you doing this, dude? Like, it's not helping the team, but you can kind of absolve that for the big plays he's able to make downfield. You have to bracket him. You have to know where 14 is. So to me, it's Pickens and everyone else on this offense. And I credit Russell Wilson for understanding that and being able to throw the beautiful moon balls to him down the field and trusting his guy to come down with it.
I'm going to get to the quarterbacks in just a second, but I guess since you've talked quite a bit of George Pickens, there was a video that was kind of going around on Twitter today about some reporter had asked him in the locker room about not being on the same page as Russell Wilson, and there was an odd exchange, a very George Pickens-esque exchange, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know, man. It feels just for how buttoned up and how tight of an operation the Steelers seem to run. He just seems very different from some of the culture that they tend to breed, I guess, within their team. He's kind of he's aloof. But he plays with an edge. So I guess that is kind of Steelers-esque, right? So I don't know. I guess just you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I mean, just the overall impression that George Pickens leaves on Steelers Nation, because he's just a different personality. He's a hell of a talent, but just a hard guy to kind of wrap your arms around. It feels like
that. I think, I mean, they've done it before in the past with AB, Le'Veon Bell. I mean, look, there's some similarities there. I don't want to say like, oh, this is an apples to apples comparison, but you can forgive that when he makes dynamic plays down the field. But yeah, I mean, some of that's immaturity and growing up and knowing when to be diplomatic, but it's just like, I think he really wants to win. And that mercurial side of him you see at times. I mean, when he was coming out of the draft, there was that game, Georgia against Georgia Tech, where he's kicking the ass of the Georgia Tech defensive back. And at that point, they're not even playing football. They're not even playing football. They're they're in a fist fight. So that's always been part of how he is as a player. But can you channel that the right way in a manner that actually helps your team? Can you do that and channel that rage in a way that makes you a productive player and that could make you as good as any receiver in this league, maybe outside of Jamar Chase and maybe Justin Jefferson? So like, that's where you want to channel that the right way. And there's times where it's like, dude, what are you doing? But then there's times where they lost 2 of the 3 games that they had without George Pickens. The lone game came against a win against the Cleveland Browns. So without him on the field, this offense is a lot different. It's a lot more predictable. The safeties can sit at 10 yards and you don't have to worry about a whole lot downfield. I mean, there's a lot to be desired at the receiver position outside of Pickens for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Calvin Austin's made a few plays. Van Jefferson's not the answer. Roman Wilson, who you drafted as a rookie out of Michigan, he hasn't played a single snap. Or he's hardly played. I think he's played like 5 snaps total this season. I mean, it's something really, really low. He's hardly seen the field at all. So it's like, what's your plan again? So other than Pickens, I mean, Freiermuth's all right as a tight end. They've gotten Darnell Washington a little bit more involved in the offense, but it's like, again, it's Pickens and everyone else. And then what's a decent run game and the 2-headed monster you have with both Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. But again, without Pickens on the field, all the explosive plays and what has been a better offense with Arthur Smith, your new offensive coordinator, with Russell Wilson, and in the front half of the season, Justin Fields, it's been better, but there's still more to be desired from the Pittsburgh Steelers offensively. There is.
I remember, I think the Bengals Nation had a collective when the Steelers picked George Pickens in the draft because they knew what he could be.
Yeah.
And of course, George Pickens going into it wouldn't be a Bengals Steelers week without George Pickens kind of lighting some sort of drama going up. And then of course it'll probably show up in the stat sheet as it has the last couple times that this has happened. Talking with Mark Bergin of the BLEAV in Steelers podcast on the BLEAV network. Happy to be chatting with him about the upcoming Week 18 game with the Steelers and Bengals. A big one for differing reasons. I'm gonna go a little bit to the quarterback situation here, Mark, because I think this was the biggest question for the Steelers going into this offseason. How much does Russ have in the tank? Is Justin Fields a viable starter? Well, it turns out Russ has stuff in the tank, and Justin Fields is a viable starter when he's on a pretty solid team and a consistent competent franchise that knows what they are doing. I guess long term, what do you see here? Is it Russell? Is it Justin Fields? Is it another draft pick? Do they kind of go that dare they go the Kenny Pickett route again and try that, hopefully with more success? But do they go that route as maybe the long-term solution, or is it some sort of combination of all of the above?
All right, so the draft pick, I'll shut that down off the top because I think you'd have to get a first or second round pick to try to find, whoever the heir is to Ben Roethlisberger. Clearly it wasn't Kenny Pickett, but this is not a very deep quarterback draft outside the top two with Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. I think those are your clear-cut top two, and there's everyone else. So drafts, that's out to me if you're Pittsburgh. $53 million in salary cap space. We talked about about this on my show. In an ideal world, you bring back both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. But there are a lot of other teams that need quarterbacks, and the odds are that they're going to pay a premium, whether it's Wilson or Fields. And I hate to say wait and see. You've got to give Russell Wilson the benefit of the doubt to see, can you finally win a playoff game for the first time since January of 2017 if you're Pittsburgh? If he is able to do that, I think you don't have a choice and you have to extend Wilson. But as we're sitting right now, having lost 3 consecutive games, kind of sputtering into the playoffs, if you lose again in the playoffs because that lack of recent playoff success under Mike Tomlin, I would then say, hey, Justin Fields, you're 25 years old compared to Russell Wilson's 36 years old. I would go with Fields. And that's how I would play this out. And ideally, you try to bring both of them back. But I look at all the teams that will need quarterbacks this offseason. And whether either Wilson or Fields would want to jump ship and say, hey, so long, Pittsburgh. Thanks for the loan season. It was fun, but I'm going to make a premium here. It's the money, but then could you potentially have a better opportunity, not just with that specific team and the personnel and the coaching, but also within the division. So those are questions where does someone want to throw a boatload of cash at either Wilson or Fields and say, hey, Pittsburgh, do you want to try to match that? Or does Pittsburgh want to try to get out ahead of free agency to lock one of the two or both up? I mean, how that plays out is going to be just as fascinating as how this current season is played out.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say this, and I said this on my show too, I'm going to say this again. Omar Khan, I trust to make the right decision because his ability to bring in both of these players for this current season for less than $5 million combined is very savvy. And because Justin Fields has played fewer than 51% of the snaps offensively for the Steelers, and it will be less than 51% even if he played the entire game against Cincinnati, Steelers are sending back Chicago a 6th-round pick and not a 4th-round pick. So kudos to Omar Khan for being that savvy. I trust him to make the right decision as this all shakes out, but it's a moving train. To give you a hard, steadfast answer to this, I don't think you can realistically do it. But at this moment in time, if you had to choose one of the two, I would actually choose Fields. Could that change in a week or two? Yeah. If the Steelers go to the AFC Championship game, bring back Wilson. There's no question about that. But how all of that plays out, that is going to be just as fascinating as it has been to watch of what this offense has looked like. Like, Anthony, my eyes don't bleed watching Pittsburgh Steelers football offensively like it has for years now with Matt Canada and Randy Fichtner as our offensive coordinator. I actually enjoy watching the Steelers offensively this season. I haven't been able to say that in a long time, since the Killer Bees with AB, Lev Bell, and Ben Roethlisberger.
Oh boy, you're just bringing up all kinds of fun memories for us on the Bengals side of things. I mean, God, dude, on your show we talked about the 05 Steelers playoff run. I mean, good God,
you're welcome.
Can you twist the knife a little bit further here? Talking with Mark Bergin. By the way, You say savvy by Omar Khan. I say borderline robbery at that point, based on what you're talking about. It's unbelievable. Yeah, talking with Mark Bergin of the Believe in Steelers podcast, does a great job. And also go check out Mark's YouTube channel where you can see my beautiful mug on his most recent episode coming out here. This is a broad, what are the biggest matchups this week? It's a broad statement, but here's where I was really kind of aiming to go with this next topic here, Mark, which is, look, the offensive game plan I felt for the Steelers against the Bengals in the first game this year was genius, because basically what I felt like happened was the Bengals were like, we cannot allow a big play to George Pickens. We will not allow a big play to George Pickens. Deep safeties, too deep, the whole deal, right? We're not allowing this to happen. We've seen this on tape. So what the Steelers do? The dink and dunk, die by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Boom, 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 boom. Then the Bengals got pissed off and impatient. So they started bringing up guys because it wasn't just, we'll let you have that all day, because the Steelers ended up scoring touchdowns. And I mean, it's not like it was like bend, don't break. They're kicking field goals. Like, no, they were scoring a lot of points with this dink and dunk deal. And then they got impatient. Then they got guys to come up. And then, of course, the big plays happened to George Pickens. Is that the formula once again, potentially, with the Bengals defense playing much better, albeit still meh at best, with the Bengals defense playing much better at this point in time, is that still the mindset you think on the offensive side of the ball for the Steelers in this one?
Yeah, I would like to see the Steelers play with a lead, something that they haven't done. Offensively, you got to know where Trey Hendrickson is. So I think that's where it starts up front. And I thought they did a great job of neutralizing him in the first matchup. So that's where I would start, is knowing where he's at, because it was a get-right game then. The Steelers need another get-right game, Anthony. I hate to say it, and I don't mean to twist that knife even further, but that's just the reality of the situation, because this team's been sputtering, 3 straight losses in 11 days. Philly, Baltimore on a Saturday, then the Chiefs on Christmas Day. 3 brutal games, but the offense hasn't been right. But offensively, that's what I would try to do. And Pickens, this is just his second game back from a hamstring injury. Really, if I'm Pittsburgh, you want to win the game. Yes, you could end Cincinnati's season. But I want to make sure that George Pickens goes into the playoffs healthy, and with the hamstring, I do not mess with that at all. So I was fine with Pickens sitting for 3 games, because it's just like, that's just an injury where you can't rush back onto the field. And I wouldn't want to say, he re-aggravates that injury, and then you don't have him when you need him in the playoffs. So that's how I look at that. But establishing the running game, I mean, Najee Harris, contract season, he had a stretch where he had 3 straight 100-yard games this season, hasn't had one since. So it's like, dude, where are you at? Do you want to go make a bag this offseason with a team that's probably not going to be Pittsburgh? So that's how I look at that. And then, the formula for the Steelers of winning this season has been pretty simple. It's controlling the line of scrimmage, running the football effectively, controlling the clock, winning the turnover battle. I mean, when the Steelers have won this season, those are the things that they've done consistently. And when they haven't, they've lost games. It's not flashy at all, but I mean, I'm talking in cliches here. You can say this about any Pittsburgh Steelers season, but that is true this season as well.
I mean, I'm just going to kind of answer my own question a little bit, and it's what's going to happen at right time. I don't know if Steelers fans know, but the Bengals, in my estimation, specifically drafted Amarius Mims in the first round because of 4 words: Myles Garrett, TJ Watt. That's why they drafted Amarius Mims. Yeah. Those 2 guys have wrecked so many games for the Bengals in those head-to-head matchups with just ridiculous plays. TJ Watt had another one. It wasn't against Mims, I don't believe, in the first one. I think he kind of made a stunt inside or something. He beat somebody else. But Amarius Mims battling a broken hand, started last week with a club on his hand, left the game. So there's that situation. The right tackle spot lining up against TJ Watt. Can you just not have a disastrous play caused by TJ Watt in one of these games? Please, can you just not have that? To me, whatever happens at the right tackle spot, that's a big one. And then, of course, you had the big one from Herbig last game too. He had a big play too. So they're finding, this is what I simultaneously envy and loathe about the Pittsburgh Steelers. They find ways to create pressure from so many different spots, really anywhere along their defensive line. They find, and they have traditionally done so.
Yeah. You mentioned Herbig and Watt, and it's on Wisconsin in a race to the quarterback, both former Badgers, and then Alex Highsmith as well. So, one of them needs a breather on the sideline. What do we do? You have a capable backup in Nick Herbig, Highsmith opposite TJ Watt. They pair really well together as edge rushers, and they make any opposing offense's lives a living hell. It's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and then of course Hayward in the middle, just doing all kinds of just.
He had an injury late in one of the last games they played, and he seemed to be okay. And it's just like, you talk about dodging a bullet. A player in his mid-30s still playing at a really high level, and it all starts up front with him, because you're talking A gap, B gap. Nothing else matters with TJ Watt or Minkah Fitzpatrick or Joey Porter Jr. or Patrick Queen without Cam Hayward up front. We love him in Pittsburgh. I'm sure you're aware of him too, Anthony, but still playing at a really high level, even in his mid-30s. I don't know if he gets the credit he deserves league-wide, but certainly we love him in Pittsburgh.
Well, two Hall of Famers in my estimation, two Hall of Famers on the same defensive line right now for the Pittsburgh Steelers with both of those guys. Talking with Mark Bergin of the BLEAV in Steelers podcast. We're going to start wrapping things up and getting out of here. I want to kind of get your thought on where you think this, because this is a weird one, right? I mean, the Bengals and Burrow seem on fire. Burrow, I don't know if you've been watching Hard Knocks. I mean, Burrow, the look in his eye, his attitude, it's kind of like next level, even for him, right? I mean, it is like dialed in upon dialed in. But the Bengals roster overall is weaker than it had been in those nice runs in 21 and 22. Steelers may or may not be playing this guy, that guy. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of different balls in the air to kind of juggle with this one here. So I don't know, man. Where do you see this one going? Is it just the Steelers kind of having their way against little brother once again? Do you think the Bengals are just kind of locked in right now? Burrow is locked in, and they're going to try and do whatever to get in and get a win against a team that has been so elusive for them in this division?
Man, I see this going one of two ways. If it's close, I like Pittsburgh just to pull it out, because I will say this: Mike Tomlin gets his team ready. He's had extra time. He's had since Christmas Day. So you had the extra time to get ready for this game.
Yeah, the mini bye. Yeah.
But I could also see if the Bengals get out early, that's been the last in this 3-game losing streak. It's like you've been playing from behind. And the reason I say that too is the way that the Bengals defense is set up with Hendrickson up front would be to get a lead, and then you can say, hey, the other team has to pass the ball, and he can pin his ears back and go after the quarterback. So I either see this Cincinnati wins by like at least 10 multiple scores. If it is a close, if it is a close game, though, I do like the Steelers. So it's like that. I'd see it one of those two.
Weird dichotomy.
Yeah,
weird dichotomy.
It is, but just the way that the Steelers are playing going into this one, the way that Cincinnati's playing in this one. But Mike Tomlin, when he's got extra time to get his team ready, usually has his team prepared. So, man, and this is why we watch. I say this, and I'll say this again. If the Bengals do get in the playoffs against the Bills, I think that helps the Steelers long term. I don't want to go on to a 4-game losing streak going into the playoffs, because then it's like good luck of whoever you're matched up against. But I'm looking at this from a seeding standpoint of like, I don't think that the Steelers could beat the Chiefs. I don't think that they could beat the Bills. Right now, the Ravens would be tough. But other than that, it's just like there's everyone else. So I'm not saying I want the Steelers to lose. I'd love to say, hey, the Bengal season is over, because I do think that you're trending in the right direction at the right time. It just might be too little too late, because remember, even if Cincinnati wins, they need some help to get into the playoffs. But that's how I see Saturday night going down. Is if it's close, I like the Steelers. But if the Bengals get out to an early lead, I like them to win by like more than 10. That's how I foresee Saturday night playing out.
He is Mark Bergin of the BLEAV in Steelers podcast. Before I get you out of here, Mark, and before you get to promote all the great stuff that you are doing, just Just a couple thoughts on Tomlin since you just talked about him.
Yeah, let's do it.
I mean, his to me, he's coach of the year this year. I just feel that way, and I know that might be not popular among. I mean, there's probably others where you go, oh, okay, well, Andy Reid because he's got 15 wins, and I mean, all the, to me, I think there's just for me, there's a little bit of a perception of doing more with. I don't want to say less, but I think the team has overachieved a little bit, and I say that in the most complimentary way possible. I don't mean that as a backhanded thing. I think they've overachieved a little bit. He is a
season is a success, Anthony. Overall,
yeah. I mean, he's a model of consistency, but I guess it all, like you said, it depends on what happens now in this month of January, what the Steelers do in the postseason. Because if they do not win, if they are one and done in the postseason, those questions, well, you know, all the great quotes that he provides, all the nice regular season wins and double-digit win seasons, they start to get a little stale, especially by Steelers standards, if the playoff wins aren't there.
Yeah. The case for Tomlin for Coach of the Year would probably be this: having the fortitude to turn things over to Russell Wilson when he finally got healthy, missed the first 6 games with the calf injury, and this offense took off with Wilson and Wilson unlocking George Pickens up front on the offensive line. Your first-round pick, Troy Fautanu, goes out with a season-ending injury. So Broderick Jones, who's a second-year player, is playing right tackle, should be playing left tackle right now. Dan Moore Jr., a veteran who's in a contract season, who's not going to be in a Steelers uniform next year, is playing left tackle for you. And you're starting 2 rookies up front. Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, due to other injuries to Zach Frazier at the center position and James Daniels at the right guard position. So you've got that. And then to have another non-losing season, to factor in 3 games without George Pickens. Again, the quarterback situation is the biggest thing. The defense has been very good this season for most of the year, despite the past 3 weeks. In 2 of the last 3 losses, you've given up more than 400 yards. Against the loss to the Chiefs, you gave up 389 yards. So overall, you hit the over. They were 8.5 was the over-under win total for the Steelers. That would be the argument for Tomlin. I would pick O'Connell in Minnesota. You lose McCarthy, your rookie quarterback, who's going to be your starter, and then it looks like that Sam Darnold's actually going to be a legitimate guy beyond this season and what they've done in Minnesota. So he would be my pick, but I certainly get what you mean with Tomlin. But this all points back to, for Pittsburgh, is the standard is the standard, and it's a slogan you hear in Pittsburgh all the time. That same standard applies when it comes to the playoffs. And when you haven't won a playoff game since January of 2017, you've got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, why? Hasn't been good enough in the playoffs, point blank, but it's also been Ben Roethlisberger at the end of his career. It's been the year Roethlisberger had an elbow injury. You went 8-8 with Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, who was your 4th string quarterback to start the year. Then you wanted to have Mitch Trubisky as a bridge. Kenny Pickett clearly didn't work out. Mason Rudolph saved you a season ago. And so that's why going into this year, it's like Russell Wilson and Fields for less than $5 million. On paper, it's better. It has been better, and the contractual value has been better. But beyond this season, because you're not paying your quarterbacks anything, you've actually got to win a playoff game, because you're going to need to pay one of those 2 guys next year, and then you can't use that money to make other upgrades on your roster. All of the money's on the defensive side of the football right now with this team. It's more old school. I don't know if that's an approach that can actually win you a Super Bowl in 2024 and 2025 and beyond. And that's what the Steelers are dealing with. So how all this plays out, it's going to be fascinating as hell, not just come Saturday night, but come the postseason as well. So, Anthony, I appreciate you having me, but that's really, when it comes to Tomlin, non-losing seasons, 18 in a row. Think about how many other teams would love to have that. You can't win the Super Bowl every year, but you can't go into the playoffs and get smoked year after year after year after year. And then it's like, is it to the point with Tomlin to where he's a victim of his own success, where with professional athletes, does his voice Does it have the same meaning to players that have been there for years now? I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that job is his for as long as he wants to. And I know if another team wouldn't hire him, if the Steelers ever parted ways with him, a broadcast booth would. He's going to be successful at whatever he does. But to me, especially in the playoffs, if you want to simplify it, it's this. It's the quarterback talent. And it's why in Cincinnati, you're lucky to have a Joe Burrow for the next decade plus. And it's something that the Steelers have been trying to figure out. Is Roethlisberger was hanging on towards the end with what's a Hall of Fame career. It's what the Steelers are still trying to figure out of, could Fields even be your bridge to whoever the next guy could be? I mean, like, I think about this, Anthony, I'll land here. Like Arch Manning, future Steelers quarterback. Like, that's kind of how I think about this, because Wilson's at the end of his career at 36. Fields, I think, is capable of being a starter, but when we're talking about winning a Super Bowl, that's probably not going to get it done either, if we're just being brutally honest with ourselves here. That's not to say he can't be a starter or a good quarterback in the league, but when you're trying to win your 7th Lombardi, these are honest conversations that you need to have when it comes, if you're a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's just the truth.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think despite the rivalry, despite some of the bad blood over the years, I think the Bengals contingent can talk about the respect that they have for Mike Tomlin and what he's been able to achieve, even though the recent successes haven't been there as much as earlier years. But Mark, we appreciate the time, man. Where can people find all your stuff? Plug away, my friend.
The kids on YouTube, if you search Mark Bergin, that's Bergin, my lovely face will pop up. If you like Apple and Spotify, you can check us out on the BLEAV in Steelers podcast, Apple and Spotify there. So that's what I'll plug. Anthony, you were my very first guest of the new year, so congrats to you. And hopefully I can build out that guest roster for this coming year. I had a pretty good list in 2024. I'm hoping to top that this coming year. I appreciate you having me on, and I cannot wait for Saturday night when we get Steelers and Bengals.
Yeah, it'll be a good one. It'll be a good one. I appreciate you having me on your show. I appreciate you coming on ours. And take care. We can still say Happy New Year because we're a couple of days in here technically. So without being total,
get Larry David's permission to be able to do that.
Take care, man. And we'll catch up soon, maybe for the AFC Championship if the Bengals sneak in. We'll see.
Love it. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah.